The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September 1878, and Adelaide Rosewood could barely believe her trembling fingers as she held the response from Lucas Kincaid of Superior, Arizona Territory, a man who needed a wife and was willing to send travel money to make it happen. Adelaide stood in the cramped boarding house room in Philadelphia, where she had lived for the past 3 months since her father's death, her eyes scanning words she could not fully understand. She had taught herself to recognize a few words over the years, memorizing shapes and sounds, but reading remained a mystery that embarrassed her deeply. Her father, a kind but perpetually drunk dock worker, had never seen fit to send her to school, and her mother had died when Adelaide was only 6 years old. At 22, Adelaide had worked as a seamstress, a laundress, and most recently as a kitchen helper in a hotel that had just closed its doors. Her landlady had given her until the end of the week to pay rent or leave, and Adelaide had exactly $3 to her name. The advertisement had caught her eye because of the money mentioned, enough to travel west and start fresh. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an older Chinese woman who spoke halting English but could read better than Adelaide ever would, had helped her write a response 2 weeks prior. Now, holding this letter with its official-looking paper and neat handwriting, Adelaide felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in months. "Mrs. Chen," Adelaide called, knocking on the thin wall between their rooms. "Mrs. Chen," the letter came back. The elderly woman appeared at Adelaide's door moments later, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her weathered face showing curiosity. Adelaide handed her the letter, watching anxiously as Mrs. Chen's eyes moved across the page. The older woman's expression shifted from neutral to concerned, then to something resembling alarm. "What does it say?" Adelaide asked, her stomach tightening with worry. "Did he change his mind?" Mrs. Chen looked at her with troubled eyes. "He sends money for train, also sends contract. Says you must sign before you come." "Adelaide, this contract, it says many things. You work for him 5 years before marriage happens. You owe him money for passage, for food, for clothes. If you try to leave, he can have law bring you back. This not good marriage arrangement, this more like indentured servant paper." Adelaide felt the blood drain from her face, but the advertisement said wife, it said marriage. "Yes, but this paper says different things. Says marriage comes later after you work off debt." Mrs. Chen shook her head firmly. "You should not sign this, Adelaide. This not right." But Adelaide looked around her small room, at the worn dress hanging on a nail, at the empty cupboard, at the notice of eviction her landlady had slipped under her door that morning. She thought of the approaching winter, of the streets of Philadelphia filled with desperate people just like her, of the very real possibility of starvation or worse. "I have nowhere else to go," Adelaide whispered. "At least in Arizona Territory, there is work, there is food, there is a roof. Maybe it will not be so bad. Maybe he is simply a cautious man who wants to be sure I am serious." Mrs. Chen's face softened with sympathy, but she pressed the letter into Adelaide's hands. "You young, Adelaide, you pretty and hard worker, you can find different way. This man, he tricks you. He knows women desperate and cannot read. He takes advantage." Adelaide's throat tightened with emotion, but she had already made her decision. Survival sometimes meant choosing between bad options and worse ones. "Will you help me sign it? I need to send it back quickly to get the travel money in time." Mrs. Chen hesitated for a long moment, then nodded sadly. "I help you, but I write my address on separate paper for you to keep. If things very bad, you write to me and I try to help somehow." 2 weeks later, Adelaide sat on a train heading west with a small carpet bag containing everything she owned: 3 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small portrait of her mother, and the piece of paper with Mrs. Chen's address folded carefully and hidden in the bottom. The travel money had arrived promptly after she had sent back the signed contract, and with it came a terse note explaining that someone would meet her at the train station in Superior. The journey took days, the landscape transforming from the familiar streets and factories of Philadelphia to rolling farmlands, then to vast prairies, and finally to the stark, beautiful desert of Arizona Territory. Adelaide pressed her face to the window, marveling at the endless sky, the strange cacti, the mountains that looked like they had been painted in shades of red and purple. She had never imagined such a place existed. When the train finally pulled into the small station at Superior, Adelaide's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed down her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she had mended carefully, and pinned her honey blonde hair more securely beneath her bonnet. Through the dusty window, she could see a handful of people waiting on the platform. Adelaide gathered her carpetbag and made her way down the narrow aisle, her legs unsteady after so many days of travel. The Arizona heat hit her like a physical wall when she stepped onto the platform, so different from the autumn chill she had left behind in Philadelphia. She blinked in the brilliant sunlight, looking around uncertainly. "You Adelaide Rosewood?" a gravelly voice asked. Adelaide turned to see a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and small, calculating eyes. He wore dusty clothes and had an unpleasant smile that did not reach his eyes. Her stomach dropped with instinctive dislike, but she nodded. "I am Adelaide Rosewood, yes. Are you Mr. Kincaid?" The man laughed, a harsh sound. "Me? No, miss, I am Henry Walters. I work for Mr. Kincaid. He sent me to fetch you to the ranch. It is a 2-hour ride, so we best get moving before dark." Adelaide followed Henry to a wagon, her unease growing with each step. The man did not offer to help her up, and he handled her carpetbag roughly, tossing it into the back. As they left the small town behind, heading into the desert landscape, Henry began to speak. "Mr. Kincaid runs a strict operation," he said, not looking at her. "He expects hard work and no complaints. You will be helping his current housekeeper, old Maria, with cooking and cleaning and probably working in the vegetable garden. You signed the contract, so you understand the terms." "I understood that I was coming to be married," Adelaide said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The advertisement said Mr. Kincaid wanted a wife." Henry snorted. "He wants a wife eventually, sure, but a man does not invest in a woman without knowing she is worth the investment. You work hard for 5 years, prove yourself useful and obedient, and then maybe there will be a wedding. That is the arrangement you agreed to." Adelaide's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to protest, to demand to be taken back to the station, but where would she go? She had no money for a return ticket, no home to return to even if she did. She was trapped, and the realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. The ranch, when they finally arrived as the sun was setting, was larger than Adelaide had expected. A main house stood at the center, solidly built but in need of paint. Several outbuildings and a barn dotted the property, and she could see horses in a corral. A few men were visible in the distance, working with cattle. Henry pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and jerked his head toward the door. "Go on in. Maria will show you where you will sleep and get you started on supper." Adelaide climbed down from the wagon, retrieved her carpetbag, and approached the house on shaking legs. Before she could knock, the door opened to reveal an elderly Mexican woman with steel-gray hair and a lined face that showed both hardness and kindness in equal measure. "You are the new girl," Maria stated in accented English. "Come, I show you room and you help with cooking. Mr. Kincaid, he wants good meal tonight since you arrive." Adelaide followed Maria through a dim hallway to a small room barely large enough for the narrow bed and small chest of drawers it contained. There was no window, and the air smelled stale. "You put your things here and come to kitchen," Maria instructed. "Wash your hands and face first. There is basin and water." In the kitchen, which was hot from the wood-burning stove, Adelaide helped Maria prepare a meal of beef, beans, and biscuits. The older woman spoke little, but her movements were efficient, and Adelaide tried to memorize everything she was shown. When the food was ready, Maria arranged it on fine china that seemed incongruous with the rough ranch setting. "You will serve Mr. Kincaid in dining room," Maria said. "Be polite. Do not speak unless he speaks to you first." Adelaide carried the heavy tray through another hallway to a dining room where a man sat at the head of a long table. He was perhaps 45, with dark hair graying at the temples, a thick mustache, and cold blue eyes that assessed her as if she were livestock he was considering purchasing. "So you are Adelaide," he said, his voice cultured but without warmth. "You may set the food down." Adelaide did as instructed, her hands trembling slightly. Up close, she could smell whiskey on his breath, and she noticed his knuckles were scarred as if from fighting. "You understand the terms of your contract," he said, not asking but stating. "You will work for 5 years to repay the debt of your passage and your keep. If you are satisfactory, we will marry at the end of that period. If you try to leave before then, I have the legal right to pursue you and see you returned or jailed for breach of contract. Do you understand?" Adelaide swallowed hard. "The advertisement said you wanted a wife, sir, not a servant." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "The advertisement brought you here. The contract you signed binds you. If you had been able to read it, you would have known the terms before you came. That is not my problem." He leaned back in his chair. "You will address me as Mr. Kincaid or sir. You will work from dawn until your duties are complete. Maria will supervise you. If I have complaints about your work or attitude, there will be consequences. Now return to the kitchen." Adelaide fled, her eyes burning with unshed tears. In the kitchen, Maria looked at her with sympathy but said nothing. They ate their own simple meal in silence, and afterward, Maria showed Adelaide how to clean the dishes and prepare things for breakfast. When Adelaide finally collapsed on the narrow bed in her airless room, she allowed herself to cry quietly into her thin pillow. She had escaped poverty in Philadelphia only to fall into a different kind of trap. But as exhaustion overtook her, she made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would work hard, keep her head down, and somehow find a way to either endure the 5 years or escape. She was stronger than Mr. Kincaid thought. She had to be. The next morning began before dawn when Maria knocked sharply on Adelaide's door. The work was relentless. Helping prepare breakfast, serving Mr. Kincaid, cleaning up, working in the vegetable garden under the punishing sun, preparing lunch, more cleaning, laundry, preparing dinner, and finally cleaning up again before collapsing back into bed. Mr. Kincaid spoke to her only to criticize or give orders, and Adelaide learned quickly to stay silent and work harder. Days blurred into weeks. October arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures but no relief from the constant work. Adelaide's hands, once relatively soft from indoor work, became rough and calloused. Her skin, despite her best efforts, grew sun-darkened. She lost weight, her dresses hanging looser on her frame. Maria remained distant but not unkind, occasionally showing Adelaide easier ways to accomplish tasks, or leaving her slightly larger portions of food. One afternoon in mid-October, Adelaide was working in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds and checking the irrigation channels, when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see 3 riders coming up the road to the ranch. Two she recognized as ranch hands, but the third was unfamiliar. Even from a distance, she could tell he sat his horse differently, with an ease that suggested he had been born in the saddle. The three men rode toward the main house, and Adelaide bent back to her work, trying to ignore them. But she could not help glancing up again when they dismounted near the corral. The unfamiliar rider was tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and a strong, sun-weathered face. He wore typical cowboy attire, worn jeans, a work shirt, boots, and a hat pushed back on his head. Even his manner of moving spoke of confidence and capability. "Adelaide," Maria's voice called from the house. "Come help bring water for the men." Adelaide hurried inside, brushed the dirt from her hands, and helped Maria prepare pitchers of water and cups. As they carried them outside to where the men had gathered in the shade of the barn, Adelaide kept her eyes down as she had learned to do. "Much obliged, Maria," one of the ranch hands said, taking a cup. "This here is Lucas Kincaid, come from his ranch up north to talk business with the boss." Adelaide's head snapped up in shock, and she found herself staring directly into warm brown eyes that looked at her with friendly curiosity. This was Lucas Kincaid, but that meant the man in the house, the cruel man she had been calling Mr. Kincaid for weeks, was not Lucas Kincaid at all. "I am sorry," the cowboy said, noticing her stare. "Did I startle you, miss?" Adelaide's mind was reeling. If this was Lucas Kincaid, then who was the man in the house? Unless there were two men with the same name, which seemed unlikely in such a specific situation. She tried to form words, but confusion and fear tangled her tongue. "She is new," Maria said quickly, seeing Adelaide's distress. "Still learning ranch ways. Come, Adelaide, we have much work." But Lucas Kincaid was frowning, his attention fixed on Adelaide in a way that made her want to both run and stay simultaneously. "Wait," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "What is your name, miss?" "Adelaide Rosewood, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. His frown deepened, and he turned to the ranch hands. "Did one of you place an advertisement for a mail-order bride?" The men looked confused, shaking their heads. Lucas turned back to Adelaide, and she saw realization dawning in his eyes, followed quickly by anger, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "Miss Rosewood, did you come here in response to an advertisement from Lucas Kincaid of Superior, Arizona Territory?" Adelaide nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Son of a..." Lucas bit off the curse, his jaw tightening. "Where is my cousin? Where is Theodore Kincaid?" "In the house, sir," Maria said quietly. "He calls himself Mr. Kincaid. He said he is the owner of this ranch." Lucas's expression turned thunderous. "This is my ranch. Theodore works for me as foreman, or he did until apparently he decided to steal my mail and my name for his own schemes." He turned to Adelaide, and his expression softened. "Miss Rosewood, I placed no advertisement." "I am sorry, but whatever brought you here was not my doing. However, I intend to sort this out immediately. Maria, please take Miss Rosewood inside to the sitting room and stay with her. I need to have words with my cousin." Adelaide found herself being gently but firmly guided into the house by Maria, through hallways she had cleaned but never truly explored, into a room with comfortable furniture that she had never been allowed to enter. Her whole body was shaking as she sat down, trying to process what was happening. Through the walls, she could hear raised voices, one belonging to the man she had known as Mr. Kincaid and the other belonging to the real Lucas Kincaid. She could not make out words, but the anger in both voices was clear. The argument went on for several minutes before a door slammed and footsteps approached the sitting room. Lucas Kincaid entered, his expression still stormy but controlled. He held papers in his hand, and Adelaide recognized them with a sinking feeling. The contract she had signed. "Miss Rosewood," he said, pulling a chair over to sit facing her rather than standing over her in a position of power. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning. Please, take your time." Adelaide's voice shook as she explained about her father's death, her desperate circumstances, the advertisement she had seen and had Mrs. Chen read to her, the response letter and the contract. She explained that she could not read well, that Mrs. Chen had warned her the contract was not what it should be, but that she had been desperate and afraid and had signed anyway. Lucas listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker but also somehow sadder as she spoke. When she finished, he held up the papers. "Miss Rosewood, this contract is unconscionable. My cousin Theodore used my name to trick you into coming here essentially as an indentured servant. He had no right to do so, and this document is not legally binding because he committed fraud by impersonating me." He looked her in the eyes. "You are not bound by this. You are free to go wherever you wish, and I will provide you with money for passage back to Philadelphia or to any other destination you choose." Adelaide felt tears spilling down her cheeks, partly from relief, but also from a confusing mix of other emotions. "Thank you, sir. That is very kind, but I have nothing to return to in Philadelphia. I have no family, no home, no prospects. At least here I have work and food, even if the circumstances were not what I believed." Lucas was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. "You are a hard worker." "Maria, is this true?" "Very hard worker," Maria confirmed. "She learns quickly and complains never, even when Theodore treats her poorly." "Then I have a proposition for you, Miss Rosewood, if you are willing to hear it," Lucas said carefully. "My ranch up north, about 30 miles from here, is in need of a housekeeper. My previous housekeeper married one of my ranch hands and moved with him to California last month. I have been managing with help from my cook, but it is not sustainable. The pay is fair. You would have your own room with a window and proper accommodations, and you would be treated with respect as an employee, not a servant. Would this interest you?" Adelaide stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "You would hire me, even after all this confusion and trouble?" "The confusion and trouble were not your fault. You were the victim of my cousin's scheme." His expression hardened again. "Theodore will be leaving this ranch today and will not be welcome back. I will be installing a new foreman and checking my mail more carefully in the future." "I would be very grateful for such a position, Mr. Kincaid," Adelaide said, wiping her tears. "I will work very hard for you. I believe you will." He stood, then seemed to remember something. He took the contract papers and, to Adelaide's shock, tore them in half, then in half again and again, until they were nothing but scraps. "That is what I think of this fraudulent document. You owe nothing to anyone, Miss Rosewood. When you work for me, it will be as a free woman with fair wages and fair treatment. Is that understood?" Adelaide nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. This man, this real Lucas Kincaid, had shown her more kindness in 20 minutes than she had experienced in the past month. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Lucas arranged for Theodore to be escorted off the property by 2 of the ranch hands, the man's protests and threats falling on deaf ears. Lucas spoke with the remaining workers, explaining that he would be bringing in a new foreman and that the ranch would continue operating but under closer supervision. He spoke with Maria, thanking her for her care of Adelaide and offering her a raise and better working conditions. Finally, as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lucas helped Adelaide load her carpetbag onto his horse. "It is a 2-hour ride to my ranch," he said. "We will need to share my horse if that is acceptable to you. I will ride behind to ensure you are secure." Adelaide had never ridden a horse before, but she nodded bravely. Lucas mounted first, then reached down to help pull her up in front of him. She found herself sitting sideways, acutely aware of his arm around her waist to keep her steady. Her face flushed hot, but she told herself it was just the Arizona sun. As they rode, Lucas pointed out landmarks and told her about the country they were passing through. His voice was pleasant and patient, and Adelaide found herself relaxing despite her nervousness about the horse and the closeness of their bodies. He asked her about Philadelphia, about her life before coming west, and he listened with genuine interest to her answers. "I am sorry you cannot raid," he said at one point, not cruelly but with sympathy. "That is a handicap that should not exist. Every person deserves education. If you are interested, I could teach you or arrange for someone to teach you. A person is never too old to learn." Adelaide's throat tightened with emotion. "You would do that?" "I believe everyone should have the opportunity to better themselves," he said simply. "Education is power, Miss Rosewood. The power to understand contracts before you sign them, among other things." They rode in companionable silence for a while after that, Adelaide thinking about the incredible turn her life had taken in just a few hours. She studied the landscape around them, so different from anything she had known. The desert was beautiful in its starkness, the mountains in the distance painted purple by the setting sun, the sky vast and endless above them. Lucas Kincaid's ranch, when they finally arrived in the deepening twilight, was more substantial than Theodore's operation had been. The main house was well maintained, painted white with a wide porch. Several outbuildings stood in good repair, and she could see cattle in the distance, more than she had seen at Theodore's ranch. Everything spoke of a successful, well-run operation. "That building there is the bunkhouse where the hands sleep," Lucas explained as he helped her down from the horse. "My cook, Hank, lives in the small cabin near it. He is a gruff old man but kind-hearted once you get to know him. The barn is there, obviously, and that building is where we store equipment and supplies. The main house has 4 bedrooms upstairs. I use one, and you will have your choice of the other 3. There is a washroom with an actual tub upstairs, which is a luxury out here, I admit, but one I felt was worth the expense." He led her inside, lighting lamps as they went. The house was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. It was furnished practically, with sturdy furniture and few decorations, but it felt solid and safe in a way Theodore's house never had. "I will show you to your room," Lucas said, leading her upstairs. He opened the door to a bedroom that was easily 3 times the size of the tiny room she had occupied at Theodore's ranch. It had a real window with curtains, a comfortable-looking bed, a wardrobe, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and even a small chair in the corner. "Does this suit you?" "It is wonderful," Adelaide breathed, setting her carpetbag down. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. Please call me Lucas. We are not so formal out here, especially not in my own home." He smiled at her, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "I am sure you are exhausted from the journey and the upheaval of the day. Why do not you settle in, and I will bring you something to eat? Tomorrow will be soon enough to discuss your duties and arrangements." After he left, Adelaide sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling with residual shock and relief. In one day, her circumstances had completely transformed. She thought of Mrs. Chen back in Philadelphia and made a mental note to write to her when she had the chance, to let her know she was safe and that things had, against all odds, turned out better than she could have hoped. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lucas entered carrying a tray with food, fresh bread, cheese, cold meat, and an apple. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted, "which is why I am very glad to have Hank, but this should tide you over until breakfast." "It is perfect," Adelaide said, and meant it. "Lucas, I do not know how to thank you for everything you have done today. You did not have to help me. You could have just sent me away." He looked at her seriously, his brown eyes intense. "My cousin wronged you terribly. The least I could do was try to make it right. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I genuinely do need a housekeeper, and you come recommended by Maria, who is an excellent judge of character." After he left, Adelaide ate slowly, savoring each bite. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into the comfortable bed. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a small seed of hope taking root in her heart. Her life might not be what she had imagined, but perhaps it could still be good. Over the following days and weeks, Adelaide settled into her new life at the Kincaid Ranch. Lucas had been truthful about his expectations. She was to maintain the house, help Hank with meals when needed, manage the household supplies, and generally keep things running smoothly. The work was still hard, but it felt different when she was treated with respect and paid fairly. Lucas spoke to her as an equal, asked her opinions, and thanked her for her efforts. Hank, the cook, turned out to be a weathered man in his 60s with a permanent squint from years in the sun and a dry sense of humor that made Adelaide laugh despite herself. "About time Lucas got a housekeeper," he told her on their first meeting. "Man does not know the first thing about keeping a house proper. He can run a ranch fine, manage cattle and horses and men, but ask him to organize a pantry and he is lost." The ranch hands, about 8 men of various ages, were respectful and friendly. They tipped their hats when they saw her and minded their manners when they came to the house. Adelaide learned their names and quirks. Old Pedro, who had worked for Lucas's father, young Tommy, barely 19 and eager to prove himself, quiet James, who had a beautiful singing voice, and others who formed the working family of the ranch. But it was Lucas himself who most occupied Adelaide's thoughts, though she tried not to let it show. He was up before dawn every day, working alongside his men, mending fences, checking cattle, breaking horses, doing whatever needed to be done. He was fair but firm as a boss, and it was clear his men respected him deeply. In the evenings, he often sat on the porch, and sometimes Adelaide would join him there, ostensibly to enjoy the cooler air but really because she found she enjoyed his company. They talked about many things during those evening conversations. Lucas told her about growing up on a ranch, about his parents who had died 5 years earlier in an influenza outbreak, about his dreams of expanding his operation and building something lasting. Adelaide told him about her life in Philadelphia, about her mother who she barely remembered but had loved deeply, about her father's struggles with drink, and how, despite that, he had been kind to her in his own way. One evening in early November, about 3 weeks after Adelaide's arrival, Lucas brought up the subject of reading lessons. "I meant what I said about teaching you to read," he said, sitting in the chair next to hers on the porch. "If you are still interested, we could start any time you like. I have books in my study, including some primers that might be helpful." Adelaide's heart leaped with hope and nervousness. "I would like that very much, but I do not want to take up too much of your time. You already work so hard." "Everyone needs some leisure time," Lucas said with a smile. "And I cannot think of a better way to spend mine than helping someone learn a skill that will benefit them for life. Shall we say 3 evenings a week, for an hour after dinner?" So began the reading lessons that would change everything. In Lucas's study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves, Adelaide bent over a primer while Lucas sat beside her, patient and encouraging. He taught her the alphabet first, making sure she knew not just the letter names but their sounds. He praised her progress and never made her feel stupid when she struggled. Adelaide proved to be a quick study, her motivation intense. She practiced during the day while working, reciting letters and sounds to herself. She traced letters and spilled flour on the kitchen table when no one was looking. Within 2 weeks, she was reading simple words. Within a month, she was working through basic sentences. But more than the reading itself, Adelaide treasured the time spent in Lucas's presence during those lessons. She noticed the small things about him. The way he ran his hand through his hair when he was thinking, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She noticed how his hands, rough and calloused from ranch work, were somehow gentle when turning the pages of a book or pointing out a word. She noticed how his voice, usually firm and commanding with his men, was soft and patient with her. Adelaide tried to convince herself that her feelings were simple gratitude, that anyone would develop affection for someone who had shown them such kindness. But she knew, deep in her heart, that what she felt for Lucas Kincaid was growing into something far more dangerous than gratitude. One evening in late November, as they sat together in the study, Adelaide successfully read an entire page from a book of folk tales without help. When she finished, she looked up at Lucas with shining eyes to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "That was perfect," he said quietly. "Adelaide, you have made remarkable progress. I am proud of you." The warmth in his voice and eyes made Adelaide's breath catch. They were sitting close together, both leaning over the book, and she was suddenly acutely aware of his nearness, of the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him, of the solid presence of him next to her. "I have a good teacher," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building for weeks suddenly crackling to life. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered near her cheek, and Adelaide found herself leaning into the touch. "Adelaide," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something, but I do not want to make you uncomfortable or make you feel obligated in any way. You work for me, and that creates a power imbalance that I am very aware of. So if what I am about to say is unwelcome, please know that it will not affect your position here or how I treat you." "Do you understand?" Adelaide nodded, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I have developed feelings for you," Lucas continued, his eyes searching hers. "Real feelings beyond respect or friendship, though those are there too. You are intelligent, kind, brave, and beautiful. These past weeks with you in my home, getting to know you, watching you overcome obstacles and grow in confidence, I have found myself falling in love with you. But I know your experience with my cousin, and the false promises that brought you here might make you distrustful of marriage proposals from men named Kincaid. And I would understand completely if you do not feel the same way, or if you need time, or if you simply want to forget I said anything." Adelaide felt tears prickling her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I have feelings for you too," she said, her voice trembling. "I have tried not to, because you are my employer and because I did not want to presume, but Lucas, you have shown me more kindness and respect than any man I have ever known. You have given me hope and a future and the gift of reading. How could I not fall in love with you?" Lucas's face broke into a wide smile, genuine and full of joy. He took both her hands in his, holding them carefully as if they were precious. "Then I would like to court you properly if you will allow me. I want to do this right, Adelaide. No contracts or tricks or rushed arrangements." Just two people getting to know each other and seeing if they might build a life together. I would like that very much, Adelaide said, smiling through her tears. Lucas raised one of her hands to his lips and kissed it gently, an old-fashioned gesture that made Adelaide's heart flutter. Then, as if unable to help himself, he leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "We will take this as slowly as you need," he promised. "I want you to be certain of your feelings and of me." From that evening on, their relationship shifted into something openly acknowledged. Lucas still taught her reading, but now he also found excuses to ride back to the ranch house during the day to see her. He brought her small gifts: a pretty rock he found while checking fences, a flower that somehow grew in the desert, a hair ribbon from town. They took walks in the evening, his hand holding hers, talking about everything and nothing. The ranch hands noticed the change and smiled knowingly, but said nothing disrespectful. Hank, blunt as always, told Adelaide one morning that he was glad Lucas had finally found someone who made him happy and that he approved of her. Even old Pedro, usually silent, told her in Spanish-accented English that she was good for the boss. December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and even a light snowfall that melted almost immediately but enchanted Adelaide, who had never seen snow that was not filthy with city soot within hours. Christmas approached, and Lucas asked Adelaide what she would like for the holiday. "I have everything I need," she said honestly. "A home, work I enjoy, friends, and you." "That is not a gift I can wrap," Lucas said with a smile. They were sitting on the porch, bundled in coats against the unusual cold, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. "Let me get you something special, anything you want." Adelaide thought for a moment, then said shyly, "A book of my own, something I could practice reading." Lucas's expression softened. "I will get you a dozen books, but I have something else in mind too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we have only been officially courting for a few weeks, but Adelaide, I have known since the day I met you that you were special. I have known since our first reading lesson that I wanted you in my life permanently. And I have known since you told me you had feelings for me that I wanted to marry you." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful gold ring with a small diamond. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they were young and poor, and she treasured it her whole life. I would be honored if you would wear it." Adelaide stared at the ring, then at Lucas, her vision blurring with tears. "Are you proposing to me?" "I am," Lucas said seriously. "But Adelaide, I want you to know something first. I know your experience with my cousin makes you wary of contracts and formal agreements, so I am going to be very clear. I am not offering you a contract or a business arrangement. I am offering you my heart, freely given with no strings attached. If you say yes, we will marry when you are ready, not according to some arbitrary timeline. If you say no, you still have a home here and a job for as long as you want it, and I will respect your decision and remain your friend if you will have me. There are no tricks, no hidden clauses, no obligations beyond those that two people who love each other freely choose to take on. Do you understand?" "I understand," Adelaide whispered. "And my answer is yes. Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Kincaid." Lucas's whoop of joy startled the horses in the nearby corral. He pulled Adelaide to her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he cupped her face gently and kissed her, really kissed her this time, soft and sweet and full of promise. Adelaide's first real kiss, and it was perfect. "When would you like to marry?" Lucas asked when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "Like I said, there is no rush. We can wait until spring or summer or whenever you are ready." Adelaide thought about the cold little room in the Philadelphia boarding house, where she had cried herself to sleep with worry and fear. She thought about the month of misery at Theodore's ranch, working like a slave with no hope. She thought about the incredible turn of fate that had brought her to this moment, standing in the arms of a good man who loved her and whom she loved in return. "Christmas," she said firmly. "I want to marry you on Christmas. I cannot think of a better gift than becoming your wife." Lucas's smile could have lit up the entire desert. "Christmas it is. That gives us less than 2 weeks to prepare, but I think we can manage." He kissed her again, then pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as they stood on the porch watching the stars begin to appear in the vast Arizona sky. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of preparation. Lucas rode into Superior to arrange for the circuit judge who served the area to come perform the ceremony. He also brought back fabric for Adelaide to make herself a proper wedding dress, along with the promised books and several other gifts he refused to let her see before Christmas. Hank began planning a wedding feast with unusual enthusiasm, muttering about how it was about time someone gave him an excuse to cook something fancy. Adelaide worked on her dress with help from a neighbor woman, Mrs. Patterson, whom Lucas had invited to assist. Mrs. Patterson was a cheerful woman in her 40s who ran a small ranch with her husband 5 miles away. She enthusiastically embraced the project, teaching Adelaide some fancier sewing techniques and gossiping cheerfully about everyone in the area. "You are a lucky woman, Mrs. Patterson told Adelaide as they stitched. "Lucas Kincaid is about the most decent man in this territory. He helped my husband when we had a hard winter 2 years ago, never asked for a penny back. He is the kind of neighbor everyone hopes for, and the kind of husband any woman would be blessed to have." "I know," Adelaide said softly, running her hand over the cream-colored silk Lucas had bought her. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real, that my life has turned around so completely." "You deserve happiness, dear," Mrs. Patterson said kindly. "From what Lucas told my husband about his cousin's treachery, you have been through quite an ordeal, but that is behind you now. You have a fresh start and a good man to build a life with." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Adelaide dressed carefully in her new gown, simple but elegant, with Mrs. Patterson's help. The older woman had stayed overnight to help with final preparations and to act as Adelaide's attendant. She pinned Adelaide's honey blonde hair up in a soft style and lent her a pair of pearl earrings. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. "Now you need something old, something new, and something blue." "The dress is new, and I have my mother's locket for something old," Adelaide said, clasping the small silver locket around her neck. It contained a tiny portrait of her mother that she treasured. "But I have nothing blue." "I think you will find Lucas has taken care of that," Mrs. Patterson said mysteriously. Indeed, when Adelaide came downstairs, Lucas was waiting in the parlor looking impossibly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with happiness. But what made Adelaide's breath catch was the small bouquet he held, wildflowers in shades of purple and blue that he must have ridden out at dawn to find. "For you," he said, his voice slightly unsteady with emotion. "Something blue." The ceremony was small and perfect. Judge Morrison, a serious but kind man, performed the service with Mrs. Patterson and her husband as witnesses, along with Hank and the ranch hands, who had cleaned up impressively for the occasion. Adelaide spoke her vows in a clear voice, no longer the frightened girl who had arrived in Arizona territory, but a woman who knew her own mind and heart. When Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed Adelaide with such tenderness that several of the cowboys had to wipe their eyes. The wedding feast that followed was magnificent by ranch standards, with Hank outdoing himself. There was roasted beef, vegetables from the garden Adelaide had tended, fresh bread, pies, and even a small cake that Hank had somehow managed to bake and decorate. As the sun set and their guests departed, Lucas led Adelaide upstairs to the master bedroom, which he had moved his things out of that morning. "I set up in one of the other rooms," he explained. "I thought you might want to take things slowly, and I want you to feel comfortable." Adelaide's heart swelled with love for this man who was so careful of her feelings. "Lucas, I am your wife now. I want to share a room with my husband if you want that too." His eyes darkened with warmth and desire. "I want that more than anything. But Adelaide, we do not have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world." "I know," Adelaide said, reaching up to cup his face. "And that is why I am sure. I love you, Lucas, I trust you, and I am ready to start our life together in every way." What followed was tender and sweet, Lucas taking his time to make sure Adelaide felt cherished and safe. He was gentle with her inexperience, patient and loving. Afterwards, lying in his arms, Adelaide felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "Happy Christmas, Mrs. Kincaid," Lucas murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Happy Christmas," Adelaide whispered back, her eyes drifting closed. "And happy everything else." The winter passed in a haze of happiness as Adelaide settled into her new role as Lucas's wife. She continued managing the household, but now she also began taking on other roles. Lucas taught her to ride, and she proved to have a natural seat despite her initial nervousness. She began accompanying him sometimes when he checked on the cattle, learning about ranch management and enjoying the time together. The reading lessons continued, though they took on a different character now that they ended with kissing and often moved to the bedroom. By the time spring arrived, Adelaide could read almost anything she picked up, though she still struggled with some of the longer words. Lucas was immensely proud of her progress and made sure she knew it. One evening in March, sitting at the desk in the study going over supply orders with Adelaide, Lucas asked, "Do you ever miss Philadelphia? Your life before?" Adelaide looked up from the list she had been reading, surprised. "No," she said honestly. "There is nothing there for me now. Everything I want and need is here. Why do you ask?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Lucas said, taking her hand. "That you do not feel trapped. I know the circumstances that brought you here were not ideal." "The circumstances that brought me here led me to you," Adelaide said firmly. "I would not change that for anything. Lucas, I am happier than I ever thought possible. I have a husband I love who loves me, a home, work that matters, friends, and a future. What more could I want?" Lucas smiled, but there was something uncertain in his expression. "What about children?" "We have never really discussed it, but I should ask. Do you want a family?" Adelaide's heart skipped. They had not taken any precautions against pregnancy, but she had not yet conceived. She had wondered if perhaps she was unable, or if maybe Lucas did not want children and had been preventing it somehow, though she did not think he would do that without discussing it with her. "I would love to have children with you," she said softly. "Do you want that?" "Very much," Lucas said, relief clear in his voice. "I just did not want to assume. I know some women do not enjoy that aspect of marriage, and I would never force anything on you." Adelaide felt a rush of love for this man who was always so considerate of her. "I enjoy all aspects of our marriage," she said, blushing slightly but meeting his eyes. "And I would be thrilled to have your children." Lucas pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. "Then I suggest we go upstairs and continue working on that," he murmured against her lips, and Adelaide laughingly agreed. In late April, Adelaide's monthly courses failed to arrive for the second month in a row. She had been feeling tired and slightly nauseous in the mornings, symptoms she recognized from helping other women in Philadelphia over the years. When she told Lucas over breakfast one morning that she thought she might be expecting, His face lit up with such pure joy that she could not help but cry happy tears. "Are you sure?" he asked, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands. "Should we send for a doctor?" "I am fairly sure," Adelaide said. "But yes, we should have a doctor confirm it. Mrs. Patterson told me there is a doctor in Superior who sometimes visits the outlying ranches." Lucas immediately began making plans to ride to Superior and arrange for the doctor to visit. "You should rest more," he fussed, suddenly anxious. "Do not do any heavy lifting. Maybe Hank can take over more of the cooking, or I could hire a girl from town to help you." Adelaide laughed, touched by his concern but also amused. "Lucas, I am pregnant, not sick. Women have been doing this for all of human history. I will be fine, though I promise to be careful and ask for help if I need it." The doctor, an experienced older man named Dr. Hendricks, confirmed Adelaide's pregnancy about a week later. He examined her carefully and pronounced her healthy, instructing her to rest when tired, eat well, and send for him if she experienced any concerning symptoms. The baby would likely arrive in late November or early December, making Adelaide realize she had probably conceived right around Christmas or shortly after. "A Christmas baby," Lucas said that night, his hand resting gently on Adelaide's still flat stomach. "Perfect." As spring turned to summer, Adelaide's body began to change. Her dresses grew tight around the middle, so she let out seams and eventually made new dresses in looser styles. Lucas treated her like she was made of glass for a while, until Adelaide finally sat him down and explained that she needed him to treat her normally or she would go mad. After that, he relaxed, though he remained attentive and helpful. The pregnancy itself was relatively easy. Adelaide experienced nausea in the early months, but it passed. She tired more easily, so she adjusted her schedule. Lucas arranged for a young woman from town, Sarah, to come help with the heavier household chores a few days a week, giving Adelaide more time to rest and work on preparing baby clothes and supplies. One hot July afternoon, Adelaide was sitting on the porch with Mrs. Patterson, who had become a close friend. They were sewing tiny gowns while discussing baby names when Mrs. Patterson said casually, "You know, if you had told me last year that Adelaide Rosewood would come to Arizona Territory as a mail-order bride who could not read her contract, only to end up happily married to one of the best men around and expecting her first child, I would have said it sounded like a fairy tale." Adelaide smiled, running her hand over the small bump of her belly. "It does feel that way sometimes, like this cannot possibly be my real life. But it is," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "You made a brave choice to come west even when things were uncertain. You survived a difficult situation. And when fate gave you a second chance, you had the courage to take it. You earned this happiness, Adelaide." In September, as Adelaide entered her final months of pregnancy, Lucas insisted on cutting back his work away from the ranch. "I want to be close by," he explained. "Just in case." "Just in case of what?" Adelaide teased. "The baby decides to arrive 2 months early." "I am fine, Lucas." But she was secretly glad for his increased presence. The physical changes of pregnancy were becoming more pronounced, and she felt awkward and uncomfortable much of the time. Lucas never made her feel anything but beautiful, though, telling her often how radiant she looked and how proud he was of her. One evening in mid-October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas said, "I have been thinking. We never actually got the marriage certificate properly recorded because of the holiday timing and the judge having to travel. I want to go into Superior next week and make sure everything is legal and official, especially with the baby coming. Would you come with me?" "It would mean riding in the wagon. which I know is uncomfortable now, but I thought you might like to see the town again under different circumstances." Adelaide agreed, curious to see Superior through the eyes of a happy, secure woman rather than the desperate, frightened girl who had arrived on the train a year ago. The trip took longer than it would have on horseback, but Lucas drove carefully, making sure to avoid the worst ruts in the road. Superior was small but growing, the mining operations in the area bringing more people and development. Lucas handled the business with the county clerk, officially registering their marriage. Afterward, they stopped at the general store where Lucas insisted on buying Adelaide fabric for new dresses, yarn for baby blankets, and anything else that caught her eye. As they were leaving the store, Adelaide saw a familiar face. Henry Walters, the man who had met her at the train station and taken her to Theodore's ranch. He was coming out of the saloon across the street, and when he saw her, his expression turned sour. He said something to the man beside him, and they both laughed unpleasantly. Lucas noticed the direction of her gaze and tensed. "Is that one of Theodore's men?" "Yes," Adelaide said quietly. "The one who picked me up from the train station." Lucas's jaw tightened, but he simply guided Adelaide to the wagon with a protective hand on her back. As they drove past, Henry called out, "Well, if it is not Theodore's runaway, guess you got yourself a better deal after all, huh?" Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face Henry with a cold stare. "That is my wife you are addressing so disrespectfully. I suggest you move along." Henry's companion, recognizing Lucas, grabbed Henry's arm and tried to pull him away, muttering something Adelaide could not hear. But Henry, clearly drunk, shook him off. "Your wife. Does she know what kind of family she married into? Does she know the great Lucas Kincaid and his cousin Theodore are both cut from the same cloth?" Adelaide felt Lucas's anger radiating beside her, but his voice was ice-cold and controlled when he spoke. "Theodore and I are nothing alike, as anyone who knows us can attest. He tricked this woman using fraud and would have kept her in conditions near slavery if I had not discovered it. I corrected his wrong and offered her honest employment, which eventually developed into a relationship based on mutual respect and love. But I do not owe explanations to you or anyone else. If you have something to say it clearly so everyone can hear." A small crowd had gathered, attracted by the confrontation. Adelaide recognized some faces from around town, people who likely knew both Lucas and Theodore by reputation. Henry seemed to realize he was outnumbered and that public opinion was not on his side. He spat on the ground and turned away, muttering curses. Lucas clicked to the horses and they moved on, but Adelaide could feel the tension in his body. Once they were out of town, she put her hand on his arm. "Lucas, do not let him upset you. I do not care what he or anyone else thinks." "I know who you are." Lucas took a deep breath and visibly relaxed. "I know. I am sorry you had to see that. Theodore has been spreading tales around the territory, trying to make himself look like the victim in the situation. Some people believe him, though most who know us both do not." "What happened to Theodore?" Adelaide asked. She had not wanted to inquire before, not wanting to dwell on that painful time, but now her curiosity was piqued. "He drifted for a while, doing odd jobs on various ranches. Last I heard, he was working as a cowhand up near Tucson. He will never run his own operation again. Too many people know what he did." Lucas glanced at her. "Does it bother you knowing he is still out there?" "No," Adelaide said honestly. "He is your cousin, and I know that must be difficult for you, but I am not afraid of him. He has no power over me anymore. You made sure of that when you tore up that contract." Lucas smiled at the memory. "I wanted you to see that it meant nothing, that you were free. I had no idea then that I would fall in love with you." I just knew that what Theodore had done was wrong and needed to be made right. I think I started falling in love with you in that moment, Adelaide admitted, when you tore up the papers without hesitation. It was the first time I truly believed that not all men were interested in taking advantage of vulnerable women. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically. Then Lucas said, "Adelaide, I want to make you a promise. Our child will know how to read and write. And any other children we may have. Education will not be a luxury or something denied because of circumstance. I will make sure of that. Our children will be very lucky to have you as a father," Adelaide said softly, feeling tears prick her eyes. The pregnancy had made her more emotional, but this was the good kind of tears. "I am very lucky to have you as a husband." "I am the lucky one," Lucas said firmly. "You brought life and joy into a house that was just a building before. You made it a home." November arrived, and Adelaide became increasingly uncomfortable and anxious. Dr. Hendricks visited twice, checking on her progress and assuring both her and Lucas that everything was proceeding normally. He instructed Lucas on what to do when labor started and warned him to send for the doctor immediately when contractions began. "First babies can take a while," Dr. Hendricks explained, "but better I arrive too early than too late." On a cold evening in late November, 3 days before Thanksgiving, Adelaide felt the first real contraction while helping Hank prepare dinner. It was unmistakable, a tightening across her entire belly that made her catch her breath. When it passed, she calmly told Hank what had happened. Hank's eyes went wide with something approaching panic. "I will get Lucas. You go lie down. Should I boil water? I feel like I should boil water. That is what they do in stories, right?" Despite her nervousness, Adelaide had to laugh. "Yes, Hank, boil water, and send someone for Dr. Hendricks. But do not alarm Lucas too much. This could take many hours." In fact, it took nearly 20 hours. Dr. Hendricks arrived by midnight, examined Adelaide, and confirmed she was in active labor but that the baby would not arrive until morning at the earliest. Lucas stayed with Adelaide the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, and looking increasingly distressed as her pain intensified. "I am fine," Adelaide kept telling him between contractions. "This is normal. Dr. Hendricks says everything is progressing well." "I hate seeing you in pain," Lucas said, his face haggard with worry and exhaustion. "I wish I could take this from you." "You helped create this baby," Adelaide said with a tired smile, "and you have been the best husband I could ask for. That is enough." As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Dr. Hendricks announced it was time to push. Adelaide, exhausted but determined, bore down with each contraction. Lucas supported her shoulders, whispering encouragement and love. Finally, as the sun fully cleared the horizon, their son was born. The baby's angry cry filled the room, and Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face as Dr. Hendricks placed the wrinkled, red infant on her chest. "A boy," Lucas said, his voice choked with emotion. "Adelaide, we have a son." "He is perfect," Adelaide whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately gripped her finger, and she felt her heart expand with a love she had never imagined possible. After Dr. Hendricks finished attending to Adelaide and checking the baby, he pronounced both mother and child healthy and left them alone to rest. Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Adelaide and the other hand gently touching his son's downy head. "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. "I was thinking," Lucas said slowly, "if you agree, we could name him Benjamin after your father. You said he was kind despite his struggles. And maybe Charles for a middle name after my father." Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes again. Benjamin Charles Kincaid. That is perfect, Lucas. Thank you for honoring my father. He would have loved to meet his grandson. The days following Benjamin's birth were exhausting but filled with joy. Adelaide learned to nurse the baby with help from Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Hendricks. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Benjamin when he cried at night, changing soiled cloths without complaint, and gazing at his son with such wonder and love that it made Adelaide's heart ache in the best way. Mrs. Patterson and several other neighbor women came to help in those first weeks, bringing food and practical advice. Sarah, the young woman who had been helping with housework, took over most of Adelaide's duties so she could focus on recovering and caring for Benjamin. Hank, declaring himself honorary uncle, carved a beautiful cradle for the baby and spent much of his free time visiting and offering to hold the child so Adelaide could rest. Christmas came again, and this time they celebrated with their son. Lucas gave Adelaide a beautiful locket that held tiny portraits he had commissioned of Adelaide and Benjamin. Adelaide had sewn Lucas a new shirt from fabric she had carefully selected and worked on during her pregnancy. But the best gift was simply being together, the three of them, a family. As winter gave way to spring, Adelaide slowly regained her strength. Benjamin grew and thrived, transforming from a tiny, helpless newborn into a plump, alert baby who smiled at his parents and made delightful cooing sounds. Adelaide had never imagined she could love someone so much, except perhaps for Lucas, and watching him with their son only deepened her feelings for him. One warm April evening, when Benjamin was about 5 months old and finally sleeping through most of the night, Adelaide and Lucas sat on the porch as they had done so many times before. Benjamin slept in his cradle nearby, and the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night drifted on the breeze. "I was thinking," Lucas said, taking Adelaide's hand, "about how much has changed in the year and a half since you arrived. Sometimes it feels like you have always been here, like I cannot remember what life was like before you." "I know what you mean," Adelaide said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It feels like a different person who stepped off that train, so desperate and scared. So much has happened since then." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come to check on Theodore that day?" Lucas asked. "If you had been stuck in that situation longer, or if I had just sent you back to Philadelphia with travel money and never seen you again?" "Sometimes," Adelaide admitted. "But I try not to dwell on it. I believe things happen the way they were meant to. Maybe if you had not come that exact day, we would have met some other way. Maybe you would have come a week later, or I would have found a way to escape and we would have met in town. I like to think that we were meant to find each other." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I like to think that too. Adelaide, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A true partnership, a family, a home filled with love and laughter. Thank you for taking a chance on me, even after everything you had been through." "Thank you for seeing me as a person worth saving," Adelaide said. "Thank you for tearing up that contract and giving me freedom and choice. Thank you for teaching me to read, for respecting me, for loving me. You changed my life, Lucas. We changed each other's lives," he said, pulling her closer. "And I cannot wait to see what the future brings." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Arizona sky. From inside the house, Benjamin made a small sound but then settled back into sleep. Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the hardship and fear and uncertainty, and how it had led to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. She thought about the girl who could not read her own contract, who had been tricked and trapped, who had felt hopeless and alone. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth, who could read anything she pleased, who had the love of a good man and the joy of a child. A woman who had found her home in the most unexpected place. The years that followed were not without challenges, as no life ever is. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, hot summers when the water was scarce, and the constant work that came with running a ranch. In the spring of 1881, Adelaide gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Mary Rose. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas after Lucas's grandfather. The ranch prospered under Lucas's management, and Adelaide became an integral part of its operation. Her literacy, once a source of shame, became an asset as she began managing the ranch's correspondence and accounts. She taught Benjamin and Mary to read as soon as they were old enough, and eventually Thomas as well, fulfilling Lucas's promise that their children would have the education Adelaide had been denied. Mrs. Chen, to Adelaide's great joy, wrote back when Adelaide finally sent her a letter about a year after Benjamin's birth. The older woman had been worried when she had not heard from Adelaide and was relieved and happy to learn things had turned out well. They maintained a correspondence over the years, with Adelaide sending updates about her growing family and Mrs. Chen sharing news from Philadelphia. When Mrs. Chen passed away in 1885, Adelaide mourned the loss of the kind woman who had tried to warn her and who had celebrated her happiness from afar. Theodore never returned to the area, though Adelaide occasionally heard news of him through the network of ranchers and cowboys. He apparently continued working various jobs, never finding the success he had thought would be his. Adelaide felt no satisfaction in his failures, only a distant sadness that he had let greed and dishonesty destroy the opportunities he had been given. She and Lucas never spoke of him except when necessary, preferring to focus on their own family and their own happiness. The house that Adelaide had first entered as an employee became truly her home over the years. She added touches everywhere. Curtains she had sewn, gardens she had planted, pictures on the walls, and eventually the marks of children, toys scattered about and small handprints on surfaces that she could never bring herself to fully clean away. The study where Lucas had taught her to read became Benjamin's favorite room, the boy inheriting his parents' love of books. Superior grew into a proper town as the years passed, with more shops, a school, and even a small church. Adelaide and Lucas became respected members of the community, known for their fairness in business and their kindness to neighbors in need. When the school was established, Adelaide was asked to serve on the school board, something that would have been unimaginable to the illiterate girl who had arrived in 1878. In the autumn of 1888, 10 years after Adelaide's arrival in Arizona Territory, the family gathered for a special dinner. Benjamin was 9 years old, a serious boy who loved reading and helping his father with the horses. Mary was 7, a bright and cheerful girl who charmed everyone she met. Thomas was 5, adventurous and full of mischief. Adelaide was 32, and Lucas was 34, both of them seasoned by hard work but happy in a deep, settled way that came from building a life together. "Papa, tell the story," Mary begged as they sat around the table after dinner. "Tell the story of how you and Mama met." Lucas looked at Adelaide with a smile and she nodded. It had become a family story, one the children never tired of hearing. Lucas told it well, making it an adventure. The wicked cousin, the false contract, the dramatic rescue. He always emphasized Adelaide's bravery in coming west alone, her willingness to work hard despite unfair circumstances, and her intelligence and kind heart. He always ended with tearing up the contract, which the children found endlessly satisfying. "And then what happened, Papa?" Thomas asked, though he had heard the story many times. "Then I proposed properly," Lucas said, his eyes on Adelaide. "No contracts, no tricks, no obligations except those freely chosen by two people who loved each other. And your mama, brave as always, said yes." "Best decision I ever made," Adelaide said, reaching across the table to take Lucas's hand. "Well, second best. The best decision was getting on that train to Arizona territory in the first place, even though I was scared and did not know what I would find." "If you had not gotten on the train, we would not be here," Benjamin pointed out with a child's logic. "That would be very sad." "It certainly would," Lucas agreed, looking around at his family with such love and contentment that Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, he could still make her cry happy tears. That night, after the children were in bed, Adelaide and Lucas sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. It was their place, where they had first talked, where Lucas had proposed, where they had shared their hopes and dreams and fears. 10 years, Adelaide said, leaning into Lucas's side. 10 years since I arrived not knowing anything, and 10 years since you changed my life." "We changed each other's lives," Lucas said, echoing words he had spoken years before. "Adelaide, these have been the best 10 years of my life. You have given me more joy and love than I ever thought possible. You have given me 3 beautiful children, a real home, and a partnership that makes every day better. I often wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently," Adelaide admitted. "What if you had not checked on Theodore that day? What if I had been too proud to accept your job offer? What if I had said no when you proposed? There are so many moments where things could have gone another way." "But they did not," Lucas said firmly. "We found each other and we chose each other and we built this life together. That is what matters, not the what-ifs, but the what is." Adelaide smiled, snuggling closer to him in the cool evening air. "You are right, and what is pretty wonderful." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence as only people who have truly known each other can be. The sounds of the ranch at night surrounded them. Horses shifting in the barn, the distant call of a coyote, the soft whisper of wind through the grass. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm, their future bright with possibility. "Lucas," Adelaide said after a while, "do you remember what you said to me that first day after you tore up the contract? You said I owed nothing to anyone, that I was free." "I remember." "That was the moment everything changed," Adelaide said. "That was when I started to believe that maybe my life could be different, that maybe I deserved kindness and respect. You gave me that gift, the gift of believing in my own worth. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that." Lucas turned to face her, cupping her face gently in his hands. "You thank me every day by being who you are, by loving our children, by being my partner in all things. Adelaide, you never needed me to give you worth. You always had it, I just recognized it. We are very lucky, you and I," Adelaide whispered. "Yes," Lucas agreed, kissing her softly. "Yes, we are." As they sat together under the Arizona stars, Adelaide thought about the contract she had not been able to read, the document that had seemed to seal her fate but that Lucas had destroyed without hesitation. She thought about how that single act had set in motion everything that followed: the courtship, the love, the marriage, the family. And she smiled, thinking how sometimes the best things in life come not from careful plans but from taking a risk, from trusting in kindness, and from being brave enough to accept help when it is offered. The morning of December 1, 1888, dawned clear and cold. Adelaide woke early, as she often did, and lay for a moment listening to Lucas's steady breathing beside her. In 10 years of marriage, this had become her favorite time of day. the quiet moments before the household woke, when she could reflect on her blessings and prepare herself for whatever the day might bring. She slipped out of bed quietly and went to check on the children. Benjamin was sprawled across his bed in the careless way of children, his book still on the nightstand where he had been reading before sleep. Mary was curled up with her favorite doll, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. Thomas, as always, had managed to kick off all his blankets, and Adelaide gently covered him again. Downstairs, she started the coffee and began preparing breakfast. Hank, though officially retired from most of his duties, still lived in his cabin and often came up to the house for meals. He had become part of the family, more grandfather than employee, and the children adored him. Lucas appeared as the bacon was sizzling, drawn by the smell. He wrapped his arms around Adelaide from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Good morning, Mrs. Kincaid." "Good morning, Mr. Kincaid," Adelaide replied, leaning back into his embrace. "Did you sleep well?" "Always do when you are beside me," he said, kissing her neck in a way that still made her shiver even after all these years. The children thundered down the stairs moments later, bringing noise and chaos with them. Breakfast was its usual cheerful disorder, with the children talking over each other and Lucas interjecting comments and Adelaide trying to make sure everyone actually ate something. These were the moments Adelaide treasured most, the ordinary moments that made up a life. After breakfast, Lucas and Benjamin headed out to work with the horses. Lucas had been teaching his son everything about ranching, and the boy was proving to be a natural. Mary helped Adelaide with some light chores, chattering constantly about her friend from church and the new dress she wanted for Christmas. Thomas played with his carved wooden animals, creating elaborate stories and occasionally running to Adelaide to share important plot developments. In the afternoon, Mrs. Patterson came by for tea, as she did every Thursday. Her children were grown now, with families of their own, and she enjoyed spending time with Adelaide's younger ones. As the two women sat in the parlor, watching Mary show Thomas how to build a house out of blocks, Mrs. Patterson said, "You know, Adelaide, I have been thinking about when we first met when you were preparing for your wedding. You were so young and had been through so much. I wondered if you and Lucas would make it if it was all happening too fast." "Did you really?" Adelaide asked, surprised. "You never said anything." "Of course not. It was not my place, and honestly, even my doubts were small. Anyone could see how much you loved each other." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "But I am so glad I was wrong to worry. You two have built something special here. This family, this home, the way you work together and support each other, it is what every marriage should be." Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest. "We have been very lucky, but it is more than luck, I think. It is choosing each other every day, even when things are hard. It is respect and trust and friendship as much as it is love." "You are wise for 32, Mrs. Patterson said with a laugh. "It took me many more years to learn what you already know." That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Adelaide sat at the desk in the study, working on correspondence. The ranch did good business with several buyers in different territories, and Adelaide managed most of the letters and contracts. It still amazed her sometimes that she could read and write so fluently when just 10 years ago she had been unable to read her own name. Lucas came in carrying 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her. "Working late?" "Just finishing up," Adelaide said, signing her name to a letter with a flourish. "I was thinking, though, we should write to Mrs. Patterson's son in California. He mentioned wanting to buy some of our horses, and we have several that would suit his needs." "Good idea," Lucas said. He picked up a book from the shelf and settled into the chair by the fire, but Adelaide noticed he was not really reading, just watching her with a soft expression. "What?" she asked, smiling. Just thinking about how much I love you, Lucas said simply, and how grateful I am for every day we have together. Adelaide left the desk and went to sit on the arm of his chair, running her fingers through his hair. It was showing more gray now, as was hers, but she thought it made him even more handsome. I love you too, so much. Adelaide, Lucas said, setting his book aside and taking her hand. I want to talk to you about something. Benjamin is getting older and I have been thinking about his future. I want him to have opportunities beyond ranching if he wants them. I was thinking we might send him to a school in Phoenix or even back east when he is older. But I wanted to know what you think. Adelaide's heart clenched at the thought of Benjamin leaving, but she understood Lucas's point. I think that is a wonderful idea. We should give him every opportunity to choose his own path, and Mary and Thomas too when the time comes. Exactly, Lucas said, relief in his voice. Our children will have choices we did not have. They will be educated and prepared for whatever life they choose, whether that is ranching or something else entirely. They will still know where home is, Adelaide said. No matter where they go or what they do, they will always have a home here with us. Of course, Lucas agreed, pulling her down into his lap. This will always be their home and ours. They sat together by the fire, talking quietly about their hopes for their children's futures, about possible improvements to the ranch, about whether they should attend the Christmas social in town this year. Normal, everyday conversations that made up the fabric of a marriage. Adelaide never took these moments for granted, remembering too well the time when she had thought she would never have this kind of life, this kind of love. In January of 1889, Arizona Territory experienced an unusually harsh winter. Snow fell heavily, something that did not happen often in Superior. The ranch hands worked long hours keeping the cattle fed and the water troughs from freezing. Lucas was out from before dawn until after dark most days, and Adelaide worried about him despite knowing he was strong and capable. One particularly cold evening, Lucas came home later than usual, nearly frozen through. Adelaide immediately drew him a hot bath and made him sit by the fire wrapped in blankets, drinking hot coffee laced with a bit of whiskey. His hands were red and chapped from the cold, and she gently rubbed salve into them. You work too hard, she said, concern making her voice sharp. You are not invincible, Lucas. You could get sick or hurt out there in this weather. The cattle need care, Lucas said pragmatically. And the men look to me to lead by example. I cannot ask them to do work I will not do myself. I know, Adelaide said, softening, but you have a family who needs you too. Please be careful. Lucas caught her hand and brought it to his lips. I promise. I have too much to live for to be careless. The harsh weather continued for 3 weeks, testing everyone's endurance. But the ranch community pulled together, neighbors helping neighbors, sharing supplies when needed. Adelaide kept the house warm and welcoming, making sure the children maintained their lessons even though they could not go outside much. She baked extra bread and made large pots of stew that she sent out to the bunkhouse for the men. When the weather finally broke and spring began to tentatively arrive, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They had lost fewer cattle than expected, and no one had been seriously injured or become seriously ill. Lucas declared a celebration and organized a barn dance, inviting all the neighboring families who had helped and supported each other through the difficult winter. The evening of the dance, Adelaide wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that Lucas had bought her for their anniversary. She pinned her hair up in an elaborate style that Mary watched with fascination, declaring that she wanted to wear her hair just like Mama when she was grown up. The barn had been cleaned and decorated with lanterns and ribbons. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a guitar, and the dancing went on for hours. Adelaide danced with Lucas, with her children, with the ranch hands, and with the neighboring ranchers. The sense of community and shared survival made the celebration especially sweet. As Adelaide whirled around the dance floor in Lucas's arms, she caught sight of their reflection in one of the barn windows. A handsome couple in their 30s, healthy and happy, surrounded by friends and family. She barely recognized herself as the desperate young woman who had arrived in Arizona territory nearly 11 years ago. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, noticing her expression. "Just that I am happy," Adelaide said simply. "Deeply, completely happy." Lucas pulled her closer, not caring that people might be watching. "Good. That is all I have ever wanted for you." The summer of 1889 brought new challenges and new joys. Mary caught the measles, giving Adelaide and Lucas several anxious weeks, but recovered fully. Thomas started showing an interest in reading, earlier than his siblings had, and Adelaide spent happy hours introducing him to his letters. Benjamin, now 10, was becoming increasingly skilled with horses and announced his intention to be a rancher like his father, though Adelaide and Lucas reminded him he had many years before he needed to make such decisions. In August, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. She was surprised, as she was now 33 and had thought she was likely done having children. Lucas was delighted, though also concerned given her age. Dr. Hendricks, still practicing though nearing 70 himself, assured them that women regularly had healthy babies in their 30s, and that Adelaide was strong and had been through 3 successful pregnancies already. This pregnancy was more difficult than her previous ones. Adelaide was more tired, more nauseous, and more uncomfortable. But she also felt a special tenderness toward this unexpected child, a sense that this baby was a particular blessing. Lucas was even more protective than he had been with the previous pregnancies, insisting she rest frequently and taking over more of her usual tasks. In early March of 1890, Adelaide gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter. The labor was long and harder than the others had been, and Adelaide was exhausted by the time Dr. Hendricks placed the baby in her arms. But when she looked down at her daughter's tiny face, she felt the same rush of overwhelming love she had felt with each of her children. "What should we name her?" Lucas asked, sitting beside the bed with his arm around Adelaide and his other hand gently touching the baby's head. "Hope," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Her name should be Hope. Because that is what I was given when I came here, what you gave me when you tore up that contract. Hope for a better future, hope for a good life, hope for love and family. This baby is the fullest expression of that hope realized." Lucas's eyes were bright with emotion. "Hope Kincaid." "It is perfect." The other children were brought in to meet their new sister. Benjamin, now almost 11, was dignified in his role as oldest brother. Mary, 8, was thrilled to have a sister. Thomas, 6, was mostly confused about why the baby was so small and could not play yet. But all of them gently touched Hope's tiny hands and promised to take care of her. As the years continued to pass, life on the ranch settled into comfortable rhythms. Benjamin grew into a responsible teenager who did indeed pursue ranching, working alongside his father and learning every aspect of the business. Mary proved to have a talent for numbers and began helping Adelaide with the ranch accounts. Thomas, adventurous and bold, talked of becoming a lawman or perhaps joining the army. Hope grew from baby to toddler to little girl, charming everyone with her sunny disposition and her father's brown eyes. On December 1, 1895, Adelaide and Lucas celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. Their children were 15, 13, 11, and 5. The ranch was more prosperous than ever. Arizona had achieved statehood 3 years earlier, bringing new opportunities and development to the region. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Lucas surprised Adelaide by taking her to the barn. He had spread blankets and pillows in the hayloft, recreating their first real conversation location, though much more comfortable now. "I thought we could remember where it all started," he said, helping her up the ladder. "Well, not really started, but where we began to really know each other." Adelaide laughed, settling into the makeshift nest he had created. "I do not think we spent time in the barn in the beginning." "That was later." "True," Lucas admitted, lying down beside her. "But work with me here. I am trying to be romantic." "You are very romantic," Adelaide assured him, snuggling close. "You have been romantic for 17 years. That is quite an achievement." They lay together looking up at the barn roof, though the small window showed a glimpse of stars. "Adelaide," Lucas said after a comfortable silence, "I know I tell you this often, but I want to say it again. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. These 17 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You have given me love, partnership, family, and a real home. Thank you." Adelaide felt tears slip down her temples into her hair. "Lucas, I was so lost when I came here. I was desperate and afraid and had no hope for the future. You gave me everything: freedom, education, respect, and love. You helped me become the person I was meant to be. I should be thanking you." "We helped each other," Lucas said, turning on his side to face her. "That is what makes this work. We are partners in all things. We build each other up. We face challenges together. We share joys and sorrows. That is what love is, Adelaide. Not just the passion and romance, though we have had plenty of that, but the everyday choice to be there for each other, to support and cherish each other, to build a life together." "I could not have said it better myself," Adelaide said, kissing him softly. "Here is to 17 more years and 17 after that, and as many more as we are blessed to have." "I will drink to that," Lucas said, producing a bottle of wine he had hidden in the hay. "Though we will have to drink from the bottle since I forgot to bring glasses." They sat up and passed the bottle back and forth, talking and laughing like the young people they had once been, though they carried the wisdom and experience of nearly 2 decades of marriage. Eventually, they climbed down from the loft and walked hand in hand back to the house, their home, the place where their love had grown and flourished. In the house, Adelaide checked on each of their children, a nightly ritual she never skipped. Benjamin was tall enough now that his feet hung off the end of his bed. Mary slept curled around her journal, where she wrote her thoughts and dreams. Thomas was sprawled in his usual careless fashion. And Hope, their surprise blessing, was peaceful with her thumb in her mouth despite Adelaide's attempts to break the habit. Adelaide stood in the doorway of Hope's room, Lucas's arm around her waist, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. From such desperate beginnings, such beauty had grown. From a contract she could not read had come a life richer and fuller than she had ever imagined possible. "I love you, Adelaide Kincaid," Lucas whispered in her ear. "I love you too, Lucas Kincaid," she whispered back. "Thank you for tearing up the contract and proposing again. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I could not love myself." "Always," he promised, and Adelaide knew he would keep that promise for all the years they had left together. They had built something real, something lasting, something beautiful from the ashes of a fraudulent contract and a desperate woman's last hope. And it was more than enough. It was everything. As they climbed into their own bed and Adelaide settled into Lucas's arms as she had done thousands of times before, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. Every hardship, every fear, every moment of despair had been worth it to arrive at this place, this life, this love. She had come west as Adelaide Rosewood, unable to read the contract that bound her, trapped and afraid. But Lucas Kincaid had torn that contract to pieces and proposed again, offering not servitude but partnership, not obligation but love freely given and received. And in accepting, she had found herself, found home, found family, and found a love that would last all her days. The Arizona stars shone bright outside their window, the same stars that had witnessed her arrival 17 years ago, the same stars that would shine long after they were gone. But here, in this moment, in this bed, in this life they had built together, Adelaide knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was loved, she was free, and she was home. And that was the greatest happily ever after she could have ever dreamed of, better than any fairy tale, because it was beautifully, wonderfully real.